forest at night had its own kind of silence, a deep, weighty quiet that settled over the trees like a thick blanket. It was the kind of stillness that made you notice every creak of the wooden floorboards, every distant rustle in the leaves, every beat of your own heart. That's when they first noticed it. Just past midnight, the porch light of the small cabin flickered on, casting a faint golden circle across the weathered boards and a few feet into the fog. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, and somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called once, then fell silent again. And there it was, a small shape, barely more than a shadow at first, sitting perfectly still at the top step of the porch. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl or whimper. It just sat there, looking at the door. A baby bear, alone. Its fur was matted and dark with moisture from the evening dew, and its ears twitched at the faintest sound. But its eyes, those wide, dark eyes, held something far deeper than fear or hunger. They held patience. They held longing, as though it had been waiting for someone. And stranger still, it didn't come just once. Night after night, it returned, always at the same time. Always to the same spot, just sitting, silently, in the cold, outside the same lonely cabin nestled deep in the Montana woods. People in town started whispering about it. A few hikers caught glimpses and posted shaky videos on social media. Ghost bear, some called it. Forest spirit, said others. One woman swore it was the reincarnation of her childhood pet, but no one could explain why a wild cub, clearly orphaned, barely surviving, would risk coming so close to people, and not just once, over and over again. You could hear the question echo in every conversation, even if no one asked it out loud. Why? Why would a wild animal show such strange behavior? What was it waiting for? And what did it see in that little cabin that kept it coming back? The truth, as it turned out, was not only unexpected, it would change the lives of a young boy and a solitary man forever. The cabin itself had been built years ago, long before smartphones and solar panels found their way into the woods. It belonged to a man named Lucas, a forest rescue ranger who preferred the company of trees to that of people. He lived there with his 10-year-old nephew, Max, who had recently come to stay with him after the sudden loss of his mother. Max was quiet, observant, and a little too old for his age, in all the ways that heartbreak makes you grow up faster. His days were filled with books, long walks on dirt trails, and hours spent sketching animals in an old spiral notebook. He didn't have friends in town yet. Honestly, he wasn't sure he wanted any. It was easier to be alone, safer. Lucas did his best. He cooked. He taught Max how to stack firewood, how to identify birds by their calls. But he wasn't Max's dad, and no matter how many marshmallows they roasted or campfires they shared, the boy's grief settled around him like a second skin, heavy, always present. Then the bear cub showed up. At first, Max thought he was dreaming. A flicker of movement outside his window, a rustling on the porch. The next night he stayed up, heart pounding, peering through the curtains. There it was, curled up at the doorstep, so still it could have been carved from the same wood as the porch itself. But those eyes, those same sad eyes, he saw every time he passed a mirror. It didn't make sense. Max knew what bears could do. Lucas had taught him. Stay far away, never approach, never feed. And yet, there was something in the way this cub sat. So quiet, so gentle. Not once did it paw at the door, not once did it make a sound. It simply waited. Was it lost? Was it looking for its mother? Or was it looking for something else, something only Max might understand? He didn't tell Lucas, not right away. He couldn't explain why, but the cub felt like a secret meant only for him, a secret he wasn't ready to share. Instead, he started leaving little offerings. An apple, once. Then a piece of jerky from the pantry, once. He left out his mom's old scarf, soft and warm. The next morning, it was gone. And still the cub returned. Every night, same time, same porch. Same silent gaze into the house where a boy who'd lost his mother sat, wondering if he was dreaming, or if maybe, just maybe, the universe had sent him a friend who knew exactly how that felt. Eventually, of course, Lucas found out, and when he did, the questions came flooding in. Why hadn't he told anyone? What if it was dangerous? What if the cub had rabies? What if its mother wasn't really dead and came back? But for every question, Max had no answer. Just a feeling, one he couldn't explain, one he couldn't ignore. Because deep down, beneath the caution and the rules and the fear, there was something undeniable. The bear wasn't just waiting. It was trusting. And trust, Max knew, was something too rare to throw away. The cabin was the kind of place you only found by accident, or by intention, so deliberate it bordered on spiritual. Hidden deep in the Montana wilderness, it sat just past the bend of an old Forest Service road, surrounded by towering lodgepole pines and veiled in morning mist for most of the year. There were no neighbors, no mailboxes, no power lines, only wind, earth, and silence. It was here that 10-year-old Max had come to live, and though the mountains were breathtaking, nothing about the move had felt beautiful to him. Max was small for his age, with dark brown hair that curled when it got damp, pale skin that flushed easily in the cold, and deep-set eyes that often wandered far from the present. A smart kid, quiet, artistic, and sharper than he let on. He'd once been outgoing, but that was before the accident, before the hospital, before he had to leave everything he'd ever known behind. Now it was just him and Lucas. Lucas, his uncle, was the kind of man who didn't say much unless there was something that truly needed saying. A forest rescue ranger by trade, he had broad shoulders, sun-worn skin, and the kind of rugged presence that seemed born from the land itself. His hair was cut short and peppered with early gray, and his beard, though usually trimmed, gave him the look of a man who lived by instinct more than schedule. Lucas had taken Max in without hesitation. When the call came, he packed his truck, left his post, and drove 14 hours straight to bring his nephew home. But what he didn't say, what he couldn't admit even to himself, was how unprepared he felt for raising a grieving child. He had tools for surviving avalanches, finding lost hikers, even comforting a mother bear separated from her cub. But what could he offer a boy who'd lost his mother and had barely spoken since? The first few weeks had been quiet. Lucas gave Max space. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, and a loft with old books and dusty puzzles. There was no TV, but Max didn't seem to mind. He read by lantern light, drew animals in his notebook, and took long walks in the woods with his hood pulled tight and his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. Lucas tried small things, showing Max how to chop kindling, letting him help bandage a hawk with a broken wing, but none of it cracked through the shell. Not really. At night, Max would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, replaying memories that cut deeper than sleep could soothe. Sometimes, he would hear the wind whisper through the trees like a lullaby he almost remembered. Other times, he would imagine the sound of his mother's voice, soft and near. And then, one night, came the sound of something else. A soft creak on the porch boards, a hush of movement, too heavy to be wind, too light to be a person. Max sat up, his breath caught in his throat, and tiptoed to the window. There, beneath the amber glow of the porch light, sat a creature so out of place it might have stepped out of a dream. A bear cub, alone, soaked from the rain, and staring directly at the door. It didn't growl. It didn't pace. It simply sat, watching, waiting. Max didn't wake Lucas. He didn't make a sound. Instead, he crouched by the window for what felt like hours, eyes wide, heart pounding in his chest. Not from fear, but something stranger, something quieter. Recognition. Because for the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about loss or silence or how empty the cabin felt without his mother. He was thinking about the bear. And somehow, in the deep woods and deeper loneliness, Max knew the story had just begun. The next morning, Max sat at the breakfast table, eyes heavy with sleep, but mind spinning faster than the wind outside. Lucas had scrambled eggs sizzling in the pan, and the smell of bacon hung in the cabin like a warm blanket. "You didn't sleep much," Lucas said without looking up. Max shrugged. "Just thinking." Lucas nodded once. He didn't press. That was their unspoken agreement. Lucas never pushed, and Max never volunteered more than he could give. But Max's thoughts were anywhere but in the cabin. They were still out there, on the porch, in the rain, next to the tiny wet paw prints he'd found just before dawn. It hadn't been a dream. The cub was real. That day, Max couldn't concentrate. He wandered outside with his sketchbook tucked under his arm, pretending to draw trees while his eyes kept flicking to the edge of the clearing. There was no sign of the bear, but the thought of it being near stirred something in him. Something warm, curious, alive. By nightfall, he was back at the window, hiding behind the curtains with a flashlight switched off in his lap. And just like clockwork, there it was again. The cub, still damp from the evening fog, it padded silently onto the porch and settled down just like the night before, right at the top step, facing the door. Max's breath caught. It was smaller than he remembered, probably no more than 40 pounds. A cinnamon-colored coat, dark snout, and small rounded ears. It looked around cautiously, but didn't seem afraid, just alert, patient. That night, Max couldn't stay put. His heart thudded as he quietly opened the front door just an inch, just enough to see, without the barrier of glass. The bear didn't move. It tilted its head slightly, nose twitching. Max watched, frozen in place. The air between them was so still, it felt like the world was holding its breath. After a few minutes, Max gently closed the door and stepped back. He didn't want to scare it away, but he also didn't want the moment to end. The next evening, he left something by the door. Just an apple, one of the small red ones Lucas had brought back from town. He placed it on the step and went back inside, pressing his nose to the frosty window. Sure enough, the cub arrived. It sniffed the apple, pawed at it, and, after a few clumsy attempts, picked it up in its mouth and carried it off the porch. Max smiled for the first time in weeks. Over the next few nights, it became a ritual. Max would leave small offerings, an apple, a biscuit, a strip of leftover bacon wrapped in wax paper, and the bear would come, take what was given, and disappear back into the woods. But what struck Max the most wasn't the feeding, it was the behavior. The cub never tore at the door, never growled or demanded. It waited, always in the same spot, always quiet, as if it understood something Max hadn't yet put into words. One night, Max left something different. A scarf. Not just any scarf, but his mom's. Light blue, still faintly carrying her lavender scent. He didn't know why he left it. Maybe he wanted to share a piece of her with the only other creature that looked as lost as he felt. By morning, the scarf was gone. Lucas didn't notice anything unusual until the fifth night. He stepped out early to chop firewood and stopped short when he saw faint tracks on the porch. Paw prints. He followed them with his eyes, then turned to Max. "You see this?" Max hesitated, then nodded. "I think it's a bear cub." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And it keeps coming here?" "Yeah, every night." "Has it done anything? Made noise?" "No," Max said softly. "It just sits." Lucas stared at him a moment longer, then turned his gaze toward the forest. "Well," he said, "we'll have to keep our distance. Wild animals aren't pets, Max." "I know," Max whispered. But he didn't just know. He felt it. This wasn't just some wild animal. This was something else. Something that, for the first time in a long time, made Max feel less alone. The days grew shorter as autumn settled fully into the mountains. Leaves painted the forest in flaming shades of gold and crimson, and the wind carried a crisp edge that promised winter was on its way. The cabin felt colder at night, and Max began sleeping in his thickest flannel pajamas, layered beneath wool blankets his uncle had pulled from the attic. But even as the world outside began to harden, something warm was unfolding on that porch. The cub returned every night, always at the same time, just after the stars began to peek through the trees. Max no longer just left food. He began sitting by the window as the cub approached, speaking softly through the glass. He wasn't sure the bear could hear him. Still, he talked. About his drawings, about the books he was reading, about his mom. And though the cub never made a sound, it listened. You could tell by the way it cocked its head when Max's voice dipped low, or how it shifted its weight when Max laughed at his own jokes. Then came the night Max took the next step. He waited until Lucas was asleep. Then, barefoot and quiet, he crept across the wooden floor and slowly opened the front door. The cub was already there, sitting on the porch, with its front paws tucked beneath its chest, like a dog waiting for its owner to come home. Max stepped outside. The air was sharp, filled with pine and wood smoke. His breath formed clouds that drifted between them like ghosts. He didn't move past the doorway, he just sat down, legs crossed, a few feet from the bear. The cub lifted its head. Their eyes met. Up close, the bear looked even younger, maybe 6 or 7 months old. There was a patch of matted fur along its flank, and one of its ears was slightly torn, probably from a branch or a tumble. But its gaze was steady, calm. Max didn't speak. He just sat, letting silence say what words couldn't. Minutes passed, then the cub shifted, inch by inch, until it lay down again, this time facing him directly. That night, something changed. It wasn't just a visit anymore. It was a ritual, a connection. Over the next week, Max began spending more time outside with the cub, always sitting, never reaching out. The bear seemed to understand the rules too. It never got too close, never tried to touch him. They just existed side by side, in a quiet that made the rest of the world seem far away. Lucas, for his part, grew suspicious. He started noticing food missing from the pantry, muddy footprints near the porch, Max slipping out early in the morning, before breakfast. One evening, Lucas waited up and caught Max coming back inside, cheeks red from the cold, a half-eaten apple in his hand. "Is it still coming?" he asked. Max froze, then nodded. Lucas sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "I need to know what we're dealing with," he said. "If that cub's orphaned, it might be in real danger. But if it's just straying too close to people, there are rules, Max." "I know," Max whispered. "But it's not like that. It's not dangerous." Lucas studied his nephew's face, how his voice didn't shake, how his eyes didn't dart away. Max wasn't hiding something out of mischief. He was protecting something, someone. Later that night, Lucas checked the porch himself. There were tracks. Small, soft, undeniable. He sighed, staring into the darkness beyond the porch light, a swirl of thoughts he couldn't settle. His job, his responsibility, screamed caution. But something in Max's face, the spark he hadn't seen in months, told him to wait. Just a little longer. 2 days later, Lucas returned from the ranger station with news. "I think I found its mother," he said, quiet over dinner. Max looked up. "Dead," Lucas added gently. "About a mile from here, near the stream. Black bear. Looked like she'd been hit by a fallen tree during the last storm." Max didn't say anything. He just stared down at his plate, fork frozen in midair. "She was nursing," Lucas continued, "which means that cub, yeah, it's definitely on its own." Silence fell between them. Then Max whispered, barely audible, "Please. You've been alone this whole time." Lucas nodded. "Looks like it." And suddenly, everything made sense. Why the cub came back, why it chose this porch, why it sat there night after night, with the patience of something waiting for a world that would never return. Because just like Max, it had lost the only home it knew. And somehow, in that shared loss, they had found each other. From that night on, something inside Max shifted. The knowledge that the cub was truly alone, not just wandering, not just curious, but motherless, tied their stories together in a way that couldn't be untangled. It wasn't sympathy anymore. It was kinship. Max doubled down on his commitment to care for the cub. He started saving scraps from dinner, sneaking out early to leave bowls of water and food by the tree line. He even repurposed an old wooden crate and filled it with pine needles and shredded cloth to make a makeshift shelter near the edge of the woods. He called it the Cub's Corner. Each morning he would check the shelter and smile at the small signs of life: disturbed bedding, a bitten apple core, damp paw prints leading in and out. Though the cub still visited the porch some nights, it spent more time lingering in the clearing, closer to the new shelter. Max began to draw it every day in his sketchbook, capturing the curve of its shoulders, the wary tilt of its head, the softness in its gaze. Lucas watched all this unfold from a distance. Aware of. He didn't stop Max, not yet, but he did warn him. "You're getting attached," he said one afternoon as they stacked firewood. "I already am," Max replied simply. Lucas sighed. "This isn't like having a pet, Max. That cub is a wild animal. It needs to learn to survive out there, not come looking for leftovers." "But what if it can't survive?" Max shot back. "What if we're all it has?" Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out into the woods, the trees swaying gently in the wind like they were whispering secrets he didn't want to hear. Then the storm hit. A harsh, cold front rolled through, bringing icy rain and snapping branches. Winds howled down the valley, and the sky turned the color of ash. That night, as the cabin creaked under the pressure of the storm, Max sat by the window, his fingers clutching the curtain tight. "Do you think he'll be okay?" he asked. Lucas hesitated. "I don't know." The next morning, Max raced outside before the sun was fully up. The ground was slick with mud, and broken pine limbs littered the yard. He ran straight to the Cub's corner. It was empty. No tracks. No prints. Nothing. Max's heart thudded in his ears. He scanned the trees, called softly into the woods, but the only answer was the wind. Back at the cabin, Lucas found him sitting on the porch steps, soaked to the bone, face pale. "I think he's gone," Max said. But that night, just past midnight, Max heard the sound again, a soft creak, a shuffle. He raced to the door and flung it open. The cub was there, but barely. Its fur was soaked, caked with mud. It limped as it stepped forward, dragging one paw awkwardly. There was a shallow gash along its shoulder, fresh and raw. "Oh no," Max whispered. He stepped outside without thinking. The cub didn't move. Slowly, Max crouched, tears springing to his eyes. "You found your way back," he whispered. "You came back." He ran to get Lucas. Minutes later, Lucas knelt beside the bear, inspecting the injury with the practiced eye of someone who had treated countless hurt animals before. "It's not deep," he murmured, "but it'll get infected if we don't clean it." Lucas looked at Max. "We can't take it inside." "I know," Max said. So they did the only thing they could. Brought supplies out to the porch. Lucas cleaned the wound while Max sat nearby, whispering soft words the cub probably didn't understand, but clearly felt. As they worked, Lucas stole glances at his nephew. The way Max held steady, the way his hands didn't shake, the calm in his face. Not like a boy who had broken a rule, like a boy who had found something worth protecting. By dawn, the cub was resting in the shelter again. But the peace wouldn't last. 2 days later, word spread around the small mountain town. Someone had seen a bear cub near the trailhead, just a few miles from the ranger station. Parents were worried. One hiker claimed it charged him, though the details were vague. Another insisted it was growing too bold, too used to people. Lucas sat at the table, jaw tight, fingers drumming the edge of his coffee mug. "They're talking about trapping it," he said. Max froze. "What does that mean?" "It means the wildlife office might come out, relocate it, or worse. If they think it's a risk." He didn't finish the sentence. Max stood, voice sharp and shaking. "But it's not dangerous. It's never hurt anyone." Lucas met his eyes, steady and serious. "I know that, but they don't." Outside, the wind picked up again. Leaves swirled across the porch like scattered memories. And just like that, the quiet world Max had built, the trust, the bond, the shared grief, it all stood on the edge of being taken away. The forest no longer felt quiet. Even when the trees stood still, even when no branches cracked underfoot and no birds called above, there was a tension in the air that Max couldn't shake, like the world was holding its breath and didn't know when to exhale. Lucas had spent the last 2 days making calls, speaking in low voices with the wildlife department, carefully choosing his words. Max listened from the hallway, trying to make sense of phrases like relocation protocol and human-imprinted behavior. He didn't understand all the details, but one thing was painfully clear: the cub was in danger. And this time, there might not be a safe way out. Max sat on the porch that evening, bundled in a jacket that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine. The cub lay curled up just a few feet away, drowsy and content, despite the wound still healing on its shoulder. Its breathing was slow. The sight should have calmed him. It didn't. "Lucas," Max said quietly as his uncle stepped out beside him. "What happens if they take him?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "They'll try to move him to a rehab center first, somewhere out of state probably, Idaho or maybe Colorado." Max's voice cracked. "And if they don't?" Lucas looked down at him. "Then they'll make the call they think is safest. For people." Max didn't ask for more. He didn't want to hear the rest. The cub shifted slightly, letting out a small huff as it adjusted its weight. It was getting stronger again, thanks to the food, the shelter, the care. Max could see the difference in its eyes now. Less fear, more curiosity, more life. And that made it worse, because the more the cub healed, the more likely it was to be seen as a threat. Lucas rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion clear in the lines around his eyes. I've stalled them as much as I can, but they'll be here to assess things by the end of the week, maybe sooner. Max didn't respond. He just stared into the woods, as if willing the trees themselves to offer a solution. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Max lay in bed, heart pounding, mind racing. He knew the cub's routines better than anyone. He knew where it liked to walk, where it drank water from the creek, how it circled the shelter twice before settling down. And now, he realized something else. He knew how to help it disappear. The thought terrified him. What if he got lost? What if the cub didn't follow? What if he made things worse? But something inside him, something steady and fierce, rose through the fear. It wasn't just about saving the cub. It was about choosing not to lose something again. The next morning, Max met Lucas on the porch, with a backpack already slung over his shoulder. "What are you doing?" Lucas asked, brows knitting in concern. "I have a plan," Max said quietly, "but you have to trust me." Lucas looked at the bag, then at Max's face. He saw the determination there, the same look he'd seen years ago in Max's mother, his sister, when she'd made decisions no one else understood. Lucas exhaled slowly. "What kind of plan?" Max glanced at the forest, a place deeper in the woods, a spot you showed me once, where the land dips behind the old fire break. There's water, shelter, no trails, no people. Lucas was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Take this," he said, reaching for a thermal blanket from the cabin shelf, "and be back before sundown." Max's eyes widened. "You're letting me?" "I'm trusting you," Lucas said, "and trusting that cub to trust you." Max turned to go, but Lucas caught his arm gently. "Max, if you do this, you have to do it right. No coming back to the porch, no more feeding. It has to learn to survive on its own." Max nodded slowly, the weight of that truth sinking in. He looked back once more at the cub, his friend, his secret, his mirror. And he knew this wasn't just a rescue. It was a goodbye. The hike into the deeper woods was longer than Max remembered. The trail they once took together, Lucas and him, was mostly overgrown now, and branches clawed at his sleeves as he pushed forward through thickets of underbrush and damp pine. Behind him, the cub followed at a distance, quiet and cautious, pausing every few yards to sniff the air or glance back the way they came. Max didn't speak. He didn't try to coax it. He simply moved forward, slow and steady, trusting the bond they had built. By midday, the sun peeked through the cloud cover, and Max finally reached the clearing. It was exactly as he remembered, an old fire break from years ago, now a shallow, bowl-like valley with soft moss underfoot, and a tiny stream that trickled between stones. Fallen logs made natural barriers, and thick brush lined the edges, creating a hidden sanctuary, invisible from above. It was perfect. Max dropped his backpack and began unpacking. A tin bowl for water, a final pouch of dried berries and oats, a folded thermal blanket to add warmth to the hollow under a low spruce tree. He worked with care, not out of sentiment, but out of love. Real love. The kind that knows the cost of goodbye. The cub stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. When Max turned to face him, the bear took a few tentative steps forward. Max sat down cross-legged in the moss and waited. The cub came closer, close enough now that Max could see its breath in the cool air, the healed pink line where the gash had been. Its eyes met his, and for a long moment, neither moved. "I can't stay," Max said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you can't come back." He reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a piece of cloth, torn from the edge of his mother's scarf. The same scarf he had once left on the porch, the one the cub had taken and then lost somewhere in the woods. He hadn't meant to keep this remnant, but now it felt like the right thing to give. He laid it gently near the spruce hollow and stepped back. The cub sniffed it, then turned its head, almost as if it understood. It walked to the blanket-covered hollow, circled once, then settled inside. Max stood still, letting the image burn into his memory. The trees around him swayed softly, the wind humming through their branches like a lullaby. It reminded him of the nights he couldn't sleep, listening to the world outside, wondering if something out there was also hurting, also waiting. Now he knew. He stayed until the sky began to dim. As shadows stretched across the clearing, Max took a step back, then another. The cub lifted its head, ears perked, but didn't rise. "Thank you," Max said. He didn't cry. He didn't run. He simply turned and walked away. Each footstep felt heavier than the last. But he didn't look back, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew that if he did, he might never leave. When he returned to the cabin, the porch was empty. Lucas was waiting inside, fire lit, a blanket ready. No questions, just quiet understanding. Max curled into the blanket and stared into the flames. "He stayed," he murmured. Lucas placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good." The next morning, Max stood by the window, staring at the empty porch. And for the first time since his mother's funeral, he didn't feel alone. He felt full, with grief, yes, but also with peace. Some bonds, he realized, are strong enough to let go. A week passed. The porch remained empty. No paw prints, no soft rustling outside Max's window, no quiet breaths in the night. The silence felt different now, not hollow or frightening, but still and wide, like the pause at the end of a song. Something had ended, but something had also settled. Max didn't visit the old trail again. He wanted to. Every day, a part of him itched to grab his boots and walk back into the woods. But he didn't. Not because he forgot, but because he remembered. Instead, he filled his time with sketches, page after page of the cub, from memory. In some drawings, the bear was curled under the spruce tree, in others, standing tall on a ridge, watching the horizon. But Max's favorite was the one he didn't show anyone. The cub and himself, side by side on the porch steps, both looking out at the forest. He didn't cry anymore when he thought about the bear. He didn't feel broken or small. He felt grateful. One morning, Lucas handed Max a letter. "A contest," he said, almost shy. "The school in town holds a writing contest every year. I figured you might want to enter." Max looked at the flyer. "Tell the story of your greatest friendship. Deadline, 1 week." He didn't hesitate. That night, he sat by the fire with a notebook in his lap, and for the first time, he wrote everything. Not just about the cub, but about the ache he carried after losing his mom, the days of silence, the cold nights, the first time he saw the bear, soaked and shivering, and how neither of them had needed words to understand the other. He wrote about trust, about letting go, and about the quiet way some friendships teach you how to begin again. It took him 3 nights to finish. When it was done, he read it aloud to Lucas, who didn't say much, just nodded, eyes shining with something Max didn't need him to explain. A few days later, they were driving into town when Lucas slowed the truck near a bend in the road that overlooked the valley. "Look," he said softly. Max followed his gaze. Far below, near the edge of the tree line, a shape moved. Brown, low to the ground and steady. The cub, it had grown. Its coat looked cleaner, stronger. It paused at the stream, drank, then lifted its head. Even from that distance, Max felt the connection snap into place, like a thread pulled taut. The bear stood on its hind legs, just for a second, watching, still. Then it dropped to all fours and disappeared into the forest. Max didn't speak. He didn't need to. The gymnasium at the local elementary school was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled the floor, and a banner stretched across the far wall in cheerful red and gold letters, Friendship Week, Story Awards, Celebration. Max sat in the second row, knees bouncing, heart thudding louder than the old microphone someone tapped on stage. Lucas sat beside him, one hand resting on his knee, steady and calm. It was the first time Max had been in a crowd since everything. A woman with bright earrings and a warm smile took the stage and cleared her throat. We received over 100 submissions, she began, and I want to thank every student who had the courage to share their stories. But one in particular reminded all of us what friendship looks like when words fail, and what it means to love, even when you have to let go. She paused, scanning the crowd. First place in this year's Friendship Story Contest goes to Max Ryder. Applause erupted. Max blinked, frozen in place. Lucas nudged him gently. Go. The walk to the stage felt a mile long. He climbed the steps, took the small certificate from the woman's hand, and stood in front of the microphone, his fingers trembling around the paper. He hadn't prepared a speech. He didn't need one.
Didn't think I'd write anything this year,
He said quietly, but then I met someone. Well, not someone, something. A bear.
a cub.
He came to my porch when I needed a friend the most, and even though he couldn't talk, he listened better than most people I've met. A few chuckles from the crowd. Max smiled. Just a little. I think we were both lost in different ways, but we helped each other find something again. Trust, I guess. Safety. Hope. He looked down for a second, then back up. Not all friendships last forever in the way you expect. Sometimes, you only get a season with someone. But that season can change everything. Silence. Then, applause. Warm. Genuine. Max stepped down from the stage, hands still shaking, heart still thumping, but lighter, freer. Outside, the late autumn sun slanted across the parking lot, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Lucas clapped a hand on his shoulder. You did good, kid. Max grinned. He would have liked it, right? Lucas nodded. Yeah, he would have. They stood there for a while, watching the breeze move through the golden trees. And for a brief, impossible moment, Max could almost feel it again, that quiet presence beside him. The soft huff of breath, the warmth, the connection. And even though the porch was empty now, and the woods were wide, Max knew something with perfect certainty. Some bonds, once forged, never really leave you. They simply walk beside you, unseen. Forever wild. Forever yours.